human capacity to sacrifice the self to something, some higher idea. So it might be the best thing you can do in your life, or it might be the silliest thing to do, like total waste of your energy and time. And it really depends on the individual's capacity to identify with something, and also to think about, do I want to dedicate my work and become a professional, which is related to professional identity, or become an extremist who's ready to just, sort of throw himself to a wall.
Welcome back to the Post Definitions podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Lancha, and today we're here with a very special guest, a psychoanalyst, psychologist, Temo
Keshelashvili.
Basically, today we're going to be talking about identity from the perspective of a psychoanalyst, of psychology.
Right.
And so we're going to start with these classic texts defining identity itself and just explore.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to your podcast. That would be an interesting way to rethink about identity as a phenomena. And I would like to start with the word and a little bit of etymology that comes from the Latin language. And strikingly, it has the same roots as idea or idiom, which means similarity, and which means sameness.
And that was in Latin?
Latin word, yeah. And from Latin, I think the first thinker or philosopher who popularized the concept, or kind of created a concept out of the word, which was more or less popular, was John Locke. He wrote a very interesting essay dedicated to identity. Most philosophers and some psychologists and analysts are somewhat familiar with an extremely insightful thinker such as John Locke, because his philosophy, some parts of his philosophy is deeply related to the problem of mind. What is mind? How it works, etc. So his essay concerning the issue of mind, I guess, was written in few centuries ago, in I guess 17th century, end of 17th century. And he had this idea that identity is a temporary quality of mind that emerges through memory and perception. So in other words, his understanding of the phenomena of identity was that it's something extremely neutral. It can't potentially be anything else. But because you are human and you have the human mind, human capacities, so it can be, it could identify itself as a human entity, in other words. So it's something about something, because very vague, because it's mind, it's extremely neutral, it can be anything. But because it's a human mind, it's a human version of that, then it can be identified as human. So in that sense, identity is a very slippery concept. So in other words, mind transforming into something. Like if it's a human mind in the human body, it would unfold as human identity. And then human identity has so many dimensions. You name it. Gender, professional, national identity, or, that's a complex phenomenon.
So slippery in the sense that if you change a memory, then it changes the identity.
Exactly.
Or the same identity can potentially exist in the same person, depending on certain details.
I would agree that, yes. So I think identity, after John Locke, we had quite a few centuries where a few people really worked on identity per se. Existentialists came and they talked a lot about the so-called the personality problem in philosophy that definitely overlaps the problems of identity or the identity as a phenomena. But I think it was not really before Erik Erikson, a prolific psychoanalyst, new Freudian school, who coined a new sort of, he realized the importance of that word because Freud wrote a lot about and extensively about identification, which is quite different from identity, because we get identity through identifications, but Freud said little about identity and more about identification.
What did he say about identification?
So, according to his theory, so let me say a few words about the difference between Erikson's understanding of human development and the Freud's understanding, because Freud was first thinker who theorized, and I'm pretty sure he took a lot from German philosophy, but also from English philosophy as well, or the British philosophy, because not all of those thinkers who influenced Freud was not necessarily from England. Some of them were from Scotland, etc. But
which includes Locke.
Includes Locke, definitely includes, and I know very few specialists in this field who say at least something about Freud's tremendous emphasis on the free association, and they sometimes think about it comes from the French school because they talked a lot about the dissociation. But it was John Locke, not necessarily a founder, but someone who put a lot of emphasis on so-called the associationism in philosophy, which means how mind identifies certain patterns and then links them or composes something that becomes way more complex. So how these associations are created in someone's mind through perception and experience. So that's another theme. But if we go back to the theme of human developmental, the psychoanalytic theories about the human development, Freud formulated 5 stages of human development. Starts with the oral stage and then ends with the genital or adult version of human development. And then the Erikson came and added 3 more, and he changed even the name because Freud used to call it the psychosexual development, and the Erikson calls it the psychosocial development. And Erikson's stages, the 8 stages of human development, ends at 65. It's arbitrary, of course. Some people might never reach that because of the club of 27, maybe. But the idea is that maybe human body is not developing after a certain age, but human mind gets more and more mature. And he might reach the last stage where Erikson theorizes what are the internal conflicts. It might be a disintegration or more integrated personality and integrated identity, which also happens before, but then the human mind even starts producing wisdom. That's the Erikson talking about human, like a final stage of human development that some people might achieve, to have such an integrated and comprehensive mind that sort of thinks in terms of poetry, aesthetics, philosophical position, the ideas that might persist time throughout centuries, etc. But it still starts with the oral stage, which is about basic trust or mistrust. And then the second stage, according to Erikson, which are the outcomes of those developmental stages, which I'm not going to go throughout it, but the one that is between 12 and the age of 18, but it's also arbitrary, sometimes 21 and even more, is what he called the identity crisis. And that's a very important part, because I do think modern world is in the state where so many people are in search of identity, and that is sort of symptomatic for our time, that identity crisis is almost everywhere.
Can you tell us about the identity crisis?
Yes, identity crisis is really about, deep down, it's really about the question of who I am. And Erickson talks about the role confusion and the cohesive or cohesion of identity, which means integrated ego, the structure, the psychic structure inside the unconscious, which is more integrated. And
what is integrated ego? Can you explain it a little bit more?
Yes, I'll try to make it maybe a little more simple, or use simple words to describe it. The idea is that if someone had more benign experiences in his childhood, and he was welcomed by his family, and he was
benign is like unproblematic.
Exactly, yes. Gentle, welcoming, and had a good enough environment to grow without too much conflicts, or with normal conflicts without too much retaliation. Then person could answer those questions, like, I'm this, have this name, and I have this role, I'm a son or the daughter of those people, and I belong to this society, etc., and I see my talents this way or another way. I want to become someone, which is another important question when we think about identity. Becoming is also very important. So that means a person had a capacity to construct the integrated ego that would reach the state of mind that can solve the identity crisis. Okay. But the confusion of roles is another extreme, which is the first one I described as not necessarily an extreme, but sort of a developmental achievement.
So the integrated ego are like the skills that allow you to say to answer the question eventually, who am I?
Yes. And the other side of that, or the flip side of that, might be that I don't know who I am, and I don't belong to anyone, any group, and sort of another author comes to my mind, very interesting analyst, Scottish analyst, Alexander Sazerneil, who also had very interesting and very creative ideas about human development.
Which period did he live?
In 20th century, yeah. I think he was born in the beginning, and he passed away not really recently, but probably around 80s. And his understanding of Ericksonian theory and also human development was very interesting, in a sense that we might never achieve good enough identity, in a sense that the person might feel profoundly confused in life, like not being able to choose profession, not being able to play and love and work, which are very important themes in psychoanalysis, which he theorized as an outcome of identity crisis, unresolved internal conflicts that is mostly organized around the issue of identity. And his understanding of criminal behavior and criminal psychology, or as it used to be called, psychopathic dimension of personality, or in modern terms, antisocial tendencies. His understanding was mostly about not receiving enough love, throughout childhood, not having enough freedom and not having a good enough environment to grow. So these are interconnected ideas, mostly organized around human personality. And if you go a little deeper, how personality is formed and constructed is what you get there inside the core is identity.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it makes sense.
No, I think it makes sense.
I try to put it simple.
Yeah, you did a great job, and we will just keep digging around on the details. It seems reasonable and like intuition, like it seems intuitive.
Yeah.
That if you have this kind of childhood without love and with a lot of conflict, then it's going to lead to a lot of problems down the line. But it's not necessarily obvious why that would stop someone from being able to say, who am I?
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Thank you very much. It's a very thoughtful question, I think, and I would like to start with Melanie Klein, who was another prolific analyst who had a very interesting idea about the foundation of identity. Because according to her theory, identity begins in the earliest days of human life, and it's extremely experiential according to her theory, because the very first patterns of being able to relate to something out there, not only being inside the mind, but also being able to relate to something, is the relationship between a newborn baby and the breast, the mother's breast. Because the baby's first experience is extremely disorganized. If we use the psychiatric term, we might say baby's mind is a psychotic mind, because you get a lot of stimuli, visual, audio, sensual, etc., but no capacity to organize. In other words, no capacity to make sense what's going on around me. The baby can't even differentiate the boundaries. What is body? What belongs to me? What is me? In other words, not necessarily who am I, which is more complex, but what am I, sort of a thing. Like, at least I have a human body, hands and legs. So baby doesn't really know the difference between something and himself or herself. So I think Winnicott's formulation is probably the at least best as we know today, that he put emphasis between the primary narcissistic mode of operations and the first not me experiences in his prolific book, Playing in Reality. He talks about first not me experiences as a sort of transitional mode where the baby begins to learn that, oh, this is me, and that's where I end, and the world begins. So first not me experience is the beginning of the end of primary narcissistic mode of operations.
Because at first they assume that the baby thinks everything is them.
Exactly. Yes. Like, there is no differentiation between me and not me. And that, of course, Winnicott brings that from Ronald Ferber, another very interesting thinker and a psychoanalyst. And also part of it from Klein, as I said before, because they have those ideas are around the theme of how we grow, how humans develop. And Klein's idea is that the first introjection of the mother's breast is the foundation of the ego. In other words, we as humans, we as newborn babies, were identified to the very first experience of being able to relate to something out there that was usually, in normal cases, the mother's breast, and providing a good breast or the breast in the sense that providing enough food and the milk that is related to the good experience of satisfaction and being soothed by a food, or the absent breast, a bad breast, in the sense that it's not providing enough milk, or the delay is so long that the child would cry many times and never actually get satisfaction. So according to Klein, the first thing that we identify to is not really a human being, but part of a mother that gives satisfaction to a baby. So that's a very interesting idea. And analysts used to call it the part object, because we call object, whenever we say object, we mean personality, 99%. And the part of a human being is not an object yet. So we used to call it the part object, right? But then Kohut comes into analytic theory, and he creates a new term, self-object.
So in psychology, an object is often a person.
Yeah, it's a person. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true. So first, sort of the first thing that we interject, and interjection is mental reconstruction of something out there. So first thing that we interject in normal case is the mother's breast. That provides the milk and it provides the life. Like, that's how we survive. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, Klein is completely right when she says, and she was accused by critics calling her theory a mammocentric theory, sort of a theory that is organized around the idea of a providing breast or nurturing mother.
Yeah, but it doesn't, at least, but it does take the woman out of it. It calls her the breast.
Well, that's a phase.
Oh, yeah.
And then the baby grows and reaches the capacity to identify face. So that's where the personality begins to emerge in human mind. In other words, the baby discovers that this part object, the satisfying, nurturing object, belongs to the mother, and starts to identify mother's face. And that idea revolutionized psychoanalysis in the first third of 19th century. And I think Melanie Klein by herself was introduced by Ernst Johns, the Freud's follower. And she made very important contributions in the overall theory. So her idea of how we start to reconstruct something that we relate to, that is not inside the baby's mind yet, but it exists out there. But the repetitive experience of being nurtured by mother's breast begins to emerge in newborn's mind, which is very complicated, and then the human personality is organized around that experience, repetitive experience. So her idea is some ways very not easy to understand. I understand it's quite abstract in one sense, but not really abstract in the sense that it is based on the newborn's experience, newborn baby's experience. Yeah, it's very experiential idea.
So to clarify, the baby is born and at first doesn't know what is it and what is not.
Yes.
And it's breastfeeding. And at some point during its breastfeeding process, it starts to realize that the breast is not it.
Yes.
And it only sees it as an object, a nurturing object.
Yes.
And some babies, they are more nurtured than others, and the ones that are more nurtured,
well nurtured, on time, etc.
Start to have a better basis for organization of their brain.
Right.
And maybe I'm theorizing that they learn to trust the outside world a bit more.
Exactly. Yes.
And then at some point they realize that this might be another creature. Another being, another entity. Yeah. Like we could say when we talk about part object or nurturing thing,
which is not a human being yet. It's something. It's the other entity. So the element of otherness starts to emerge in baby's mind, and all of this is a sort of. It takes a lot for a baby to learn all of this, and this is all before baby reaches so-called the Oedipal level or linguistic level, where the baby starts to use language or starts to say, "Oh, this is my mother, this is my father, and I'm someone in this triangular relationship."
And I might be interjecting with something that's jumping a bit, but I'm actually still curious about what the difference between personality and identity is. Because I'm kind of jumping ahead and thinking that soon the baby is going to start developing both personality and an identity.
Right. To put it brief, I think personality has... I don't want to go too far from that question, because the word persona comes from the Latin word persa una, which means a mask. And usually in old Greek culture and the Roman Latin word, their understanding of personality was that that's something that can be observed by society. But beyond or behind that mask is the true personality. So Jung embraced that idea. And Winnicott also made a very important contribution in psychoanalytic theory when he proposed an amazing paper, and that then later on it became a chapter of his book called The Ego Distortions in Terms of True and the False Self. So he takes something from the Jung, but also he theorizes something that comes from his original work and his theory. And that's a big difference between how we thought about personality before and after Winnicott's contribution, at least in contemporary psychoanalysis and relational psychoanalysis. The idea is that personality is a term that describes a human individual, the human character, but not necessarily those aspects that can be described more precisely by the use of the term identity, if it makes sense. So in other words, we have a sociology or social psychology, and the other extreme is individual psychology or personality psychology. And in personality psychology, you have so many different sub-branches. And one of the important themes are the identity, the concept of identity that was mostly introduced by Erik Erikson, as I said before. William James also wrote about identity, and other psychologists, but I think it was really Erik Erikson who sort of brought that term in the modern sense. How we think about identity these days is really coming from, I would say, John Locke, and then Erik Erikson. Yeah.
And
so, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes. I think it's a very complicated subject, and it's a great intro into it.
But if you have any other questions related to different kinds of identities, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
And maybe we could contextualize, to not make this interview too abstract and too philosophical, the role of identity in the modern world and in a political context. Because
that would be great.
I do think that some of the extremities we see in this world are stemming from identity crisis. Whether it's about the religious extremism or right-wing extremism, these are mostly related to the fantasies that we could destroy something, or we could become extremely destructive in the sense to create something better, or eliminate bad and cultivate good, which is totally a subject's fantasy about how to handle the problematic situations in this world. So I don't want to be too particular in this way, because I don't want to talk about any particular religion or political wing, but this idea of growing terrorism in this world, or people ready to sacrifice themselves to some ideologies or religions, etc. I think it comes from a deep unconscious conflict, internal conflict that unfolds itself between life and death, as if the individual is sort of a medium who's going to decide what stays alive and what part of the world deserves to be and what part not to be. If we use the Shakespearean formulation. Yeah, which we call the paranoid schizoid split between good and bad. So no gray zone.
So you said people willing to sacrifice themselves for an ideology, and I wonder, like, and from a psychological perspective, what is the key difference between like sacrificing someone's, like dedicating someone's life to something? You know, say someone has like something that's really important to them, and they dedicate their life to it, whether they want to be a doctor or they want to stand behind a political ideology. And is that deeply different than someone who actually, you said sacrifice, that means you would die for a cause.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, huge difference. The one is, I always feel hesitant about calling one version of identity a healthy one and another unhealthy, because you never really know what is healthy and unhealthy unless you really, really deeply contextualize the situation in the overall context.
You mean that you can't just look at the personality or the thing on the person, like we can't look at a political figure and say very clearly whether they have a healthy or unhealthy identity without having them in your office for years. Or
in a sense that you really need to learn a lot before you make that kind of conclusion. And I know there's a huge temptation in this modern world to make it everything quick and quick fix and a quick diagnosis and shallow understandings, that make it even worse. So my point is, when we think about identity, we really need to contextualize the way we think about it in the overall reality, which means political reality, social reality, class, gender, race, etc., what we call the intersectionality. So it's very important when we think about identity.
Can you maybe give an example? Like, what does it mean to contextualize?
Right.
And in what context do you need to contextualize identity?
Right. So as we were talking about human capacity to sacrifice the self to something, some higher idea. So it might be the best thing you can do in your life, or it might be the silliest thing to do, like total waste of your energy and time. And it really depends on the individual's capacity to identify with something, and also to think about, do I want to dedicate my work and become a professional, which is related to professional identity, or become an extremist who is ready to just, sort of throw himself to a wall and disappear from the world. So there is a big difference, even though the idea of self being identified with something out there, whether it's about the grandiose idea of, and this grandiose idea might be professional in the best service of the society, let's say becoming a good doctor or a computer scientist who would help humanity to, develop certain kind of medical or you name it, any field, because it's a huge field. Or think about the political or religious extremisms, So you would get a huge difference, even though the deep down, the pattern would be quite similar, if not the same. So being ready to dedicate yourself and even sacrifice yourself if necessary. So there are lots of examples throughout the history. Like if you think about what happened during the Second World War, there are many people who were dying for others in Holocaust, helping others. There's a famous person. He was from Czechoslovakia, Janusz Korczak. He was I think he was a teacher at that time, who led Jewish children to a gas chamber. He never, he didn't leave them. He led them to the chamber. He sacrificed himself. He stayed with them till the end of his or their lives. So that's a huge heroic example we have. Or think about the Nicholas Winton.
Can we stop on that example for a moment? So they all died. He died too.
He died with them. Yeah.
And what was the purpose of that? And also, what is the psychological?
I think there is only one word that really describes that.
Yeah.
Love. He loved them, and he was loved by those children, and they had very strong connection. And he had an opportunity to survive, and he didn't use that opportunity.
Okay.
And he is a hero. So that's a version of self-sacrifice. And I think that's really about the healthy identity. Even though he was a professional, he was a teacher. But there is another very interesting stories about similar sort of similar heroic self-sacrificial behaviors, I would say, by Nicholas Winton and others as well, who risked themselves to help people to survive. And the human history is full of those kind of examples, that we are profoundly social creatures, and this ability to identify with something or someone, with the group or the idea that serves the group one way or another, is really about the same capacity to be identified with something. In other words, we are the creatures who might sublime themselves and stand above the sort of a primordial physiological needs that I need to eat and survive, etc. So that's where the Darwin's theory is challenged in psychology, because the altruism is a very complicated concept.
But I guess some people would argue that it fits with Darwin. Like social humans being social creatures can fit in a Darwinian theory because we survived socially. Like we keep each other alive, and therefore the species lives on.
Exactly.